Hello, guys. Yeah, please remind me if I'm not recording because there are some other people who didn't join the session and they wanted the recording. Or if you guys want to look at it later, it's helpful for you also. But yeah, so as I was describing, this is a simple function that takes two parameters and it returns the sum of those two parameters. Okay, so as you can see, this is a standard Python syntax. You have to say def. Def means it's a definition. Okay, and you have to put a space, and this is the name of the function, add, and you put parentheses and you put two parameters inside. You can have as many number of parameters as you want. In this case, this function takes two parameters, and I'm naming them as number one, number two, and then I'm returning those values. So you can see this return is a keyword. That means this is the return value from the function. Okay, so if I want to call this function, I would do something like add 5 and 3. Okay, so when I say this, here number one is 5 and number two is 3. Okay, and then when I'm returning the value, I'm returning 5 plus 3, so it's going to be 8. Okay, so I'm going to print this. Okay, and if I run this code, and you're going to see the output as 8. Okay, so this is a simple function that takes two parameters and it returns some value. Okay, so if I pass three parameters, okay, add 5, 3, 2. Okay, what does it do? It will throw an error because this function is supposed to accept only two parameters. It cannot add three parameters. Okay, so if I do that, it's going to say, hey, add takes two arguments, but you gave me 3. I don't know what to do. So that's the error that you're going to get. Okay. Or if I pass less number of parameters, it's also going to complain because it's expecting two parameters, but I passed only one parameter. So it's going to say add is missing one argument and the missing one is number 2. Okay. So if you want to take another function that takes 3 parameters, you need to write another function. Okay. There are other ways also, but num1, num2, num3. Okay. And then I'm going to return num1 plus 2 plus num3. Okay. So something along these lines that it would take 3 parameters and then it would return the value of those 3 parameters. Okay. So I'm going to comment that out, or else I'm going to put it at the bottom. Okay. All right. So this is a simple function that is taking, and functions, as you can see, there is a space, or it's called indentation. Now let me close the door for that. So this is called indentation. And in Python, anytime you have a block, when I say block, that means it's a it's within that function. So to indicate that this code is within that function, you need to put those spaces. Okay. So let's say if I want to print number 1, okay, I want to print number 2. So that indentation has to be there. Okay. So as long as Python sees that space, it will think that all these 3 statements belong to that same function. Okay. So if I have this here, print, and it doesn't have that indentation, that means this print, which is on line number 5, is outside the function. Okay. It's not inside the function. So that's how Python determines whether that statement is part of that block, part of that function or not. Okay. So Python's indentation is very important. Even if you have a little more indentation, that is not good. Okay, it's going to complain, it's going to throw an error and all that. Okay, it has to be the exact indentation. Okay, so it works fine now. Okay, it prints number 1, number 2, it prints this thing also. Okay, so if I have more indentation, it's going to complain that. Okay, so it's going to say, hey, you have indentation error, unexpected indent, and all that. Okay. Okay. All right. So that's a simple function. Now, a function you can do anything you want. Anything that you are doing outside the function, you can put it inside the function. and access the parameters or any of that stuff. Okay. So that is a simple function. Okay. Now let's look at classes. Okay. So you can have a class and think of class as an object that you are declaring your own. Okay. That means you are actually creating your own user-defined object. Okay. So here I can have something like an employee class. Okay. And the employee class has something like an employee ID, maybe employee name, social security number, address, and all that stuff. Okay. So there is a method called as initialization. So I'm going to say initialization. So forget about the self. I'm going to talk about self in a second. But let's say that this method or function takes, let's say, employee ID. Okay. And it takes SSN, and it also takes address. Okay. So I'm going to say self dot employee ID. Okay. Self dot SSN. Okay. All right. So what I'm doing here is to reduce the confusion, I'm going to put EMPL. All right. So here I'm declaring an employee class, and I'm having three member variables. These are called member variables, and I'm passing employee ID, social security number, and address. Okay. So if I want to declare this employee class, by the way, look at the indentation. Okay. So this is a class, and inside the class, there is an initialization method. And inside the initialization method, I have these statements. Okay. So the indentation is very important. You need to provide that indentation. Okay. All right. So if I want to have an employee class, I'm going to say equal to employee. Let's say my employee ID is 123, and social security number is let's say 123 45 600. Okay. And address is, let's say, and I'm going to put 153 ABC Street. Okay. So you can see that there are three parameters that I'm passing. One is a employee ID, and then I'm passing social security number, and then I'm passing address. Okay. Now, here I have an employee declared. Okay. So if I do print e dot, let's call this Rich. Okay. Let's or Sam. Okay. So Sam is the name of employee, and I'm going to say Sam dot employee ID. Okay, so guess what this employee ID is going to print? It's going to print 123 because we assigned employee ID as 123, which is coming from this parameter, which is this guy. And I'm saying print this particular class dot employee ID. Okay. All right. Now, yeah, let me run this code. You're going to see it prints 123. Okay. Now, you might have noticed the print statements are not very descriptive. If you want, we can make it more descriptive also. Okay, so I can do something like employee ID is, okay, plus this. But here, instead of doing plus and all this, there's a shortcut. I can put F, and I can put curly parentheses or curly brackets. Okay. So that's it. Okay. So if I say F in the beginning, which is formatted string, and the formatted string I'm saying Sam's employee ID is, and whatever is inside this curly parenthesis, that means that's not a string, but it's going to evaluate and it's going to print that. Okay. So if I run this, it's going to say, you're going to see at the bottom here, it says Sam's employee ID is 123. Okay. So here I'm going to say number one parameter is, okay. So it's going to be more descriptive if you add these formatted strings. Okay. So you can see that number one parameter is this, Sam's employee ID is this, and all that. Okay. So these are called formatted strings. You would put a string, the regular string that you want, but any number or anything that you want to be evaluated, that you put inside the curly parentheses. Okay, so if I remove that curly parentheses, guess what happens? It's going to print this thing. Number 2 parameter is num2. Okay, that means it has no idea. Okay. So it has no idea that this has to be evaluated. Okay, so if you want that to be evaluated, you have to put it inside the curly parentheses. Okay. All right, so it's going to evaluate and it's going to print that value. Okay. All right, so that is f string, formatted string, and this is a class. Now let's also take date of birth. Date of birth. So dot date of birth. Now you might be thinking, why do I need classes and all this? Okay, so let's print date of birth as 12. Yeah, let's take January 1, 1990. Okay, let's say that is the date of birth of that employee. Okay, now we are assigning this value here, but I can have another method which is like get age. Okay, so here get age is a member method that can get you the age of this employee. Okay, so inside this get age, I can get current system time minus employee date of birth, self.dot. Okay, and then I can return that. Okay, and then I can return the date of birth. So that will give me the age. Okay, so there are some date time calculations. Let me simply convert that date time object. Okay, so if you don't understand something, unmute and ask me the questions. So here I have month, day, and year. Okay, so in Python, if you have a string and you want to convert that to date time, you can do something like this. You can do import date time. Okay, and you can do date time. Oh, by the way, Python has this good interpreter. So if you go to Python console here, okay, so that's going to bring up Python console. Okay. So in the Python console, you can experiment. You can try it out different things. Okay, so I'm going to say import date time. Okay, and once I import the date time, I can say date time dot date time dot now. Okay, so when I say now, that's going to print the current system time. Okay, it's going to print 2022 August 14, 4:54, 9 seconds, and this is the microseconds and all that. Okay, so this prints the current system time. Okay, if I rerun that, it's going to print the seconds is 28. Okay, so then this method called now is going to give me the system date time. Okay, so here when I said import, for some reason I cannot scroll up, but I did run a statement called import date time. So when I said that, what I'm telling Python is I want to access a module called a date time. A module is nothing but a file somewhere in the system or a package. And from that package, I'm going to use some methods. Okay, so I have to import that first. And then once I import, I can access the individual methods and all that. Okay, so we say import datetime, and then we say datetime.now and all that, and then we print it. Okay, all right. So that is a simple system time and all that. Okay, now if I have a string, something like this, how do I convert that to datetime? Okay, so datetime module has something called a string p time. Okay, str p time. That pretty much means it's a parse, string parse, convert that to date time and all that. Okay, str p time. And here I'm going to say 01, 1990. And this is month, day, and year. Okay, so I can put %m, %t, %y1, or %y. Okay, all right. So that gave me a date time object saying that it's 1990, January 1st, and all that. Okay, so if I want to find out the difference between two date times, I can simply do this. Datetime dot now minus All right, so what I got here is I'm getting the system date time, and then I'm subtracting January 1, 1990. So I had a string object, which was January 1st, 1990. I converted that into date time, and then I subtracted two date times. That gave me something called as delta. Time delta is basically the difference. And the time delta says the difference between those two dates is 11,913 days, 60,000 seconds, and these are the microseconds and all that. Okay, so now I'm going to take this and I'm going to put it here. Okay, so return this thing. Okay, now instead of January 1, 1990, here I'm going to do date DOB, or date of birth. Okay, so because that January 1, 1990 was just to test it out. Okay, now here we have to take the employee's date of birth. So I put self.date of birth, which is what we are getting from here. Okay. Are you guys with me so far? So I'm just demonstrating.
Yes.
So I'm just demonstrating the advantage of using classes, because a class can have a bunch of member variables, but also you can have some custom defined methods. Okay. So now I can just do sam.getAge. Okay. And I can say print Sam's age. Okay. That's it. Okay. Or I can have another person, David. Okay, whose employee information is a little different. Okay, so this guy is maybe 1985. Okay, now I can say print David.getAge. Okay, now this is going to print the age and all that. Okay, now this format is not really nice because it says 10,000 days, but I can convert the days to years and all that. Okay, so I can take the dot days and divide by 365 and all that. But for now, I just want to demonstrate that. So I just printing the difference as this. Okay, so this guy is 10,000 days old, 10,087. The other guy is 11,913 days old and all that. Okay. So the advantage of using classes is that you can group a bunch of methods together and then call individually. Okay, so I can write the code once and I can call it for different employees or different objects and all that. Okay. Now let's say there's another thing, which is like if an employee is more than 10,000 days old, or yeah, let's say if an employee is more than, let's say 40 years old, you want to give them a greeting card. Okay, so you can have another method, is employee eligible for greeting cards. Okay. And here you can do self.getAge. Okay, so here, when I say self.getAge, I'm actually calling this method. Okay, so here self, by now you might have figured out, self means this own object. Okay, so for this particular object, I'm calling the getAge. Okay, so here, when I say self, for Sam, the self is this. Okay, for David, the self is this. Okay, that means every object has its own self. Okay, so for Sam, all the details will be pointing to that particular Sam's details. For David, it will be pointing to David's details and all that. Okay. So when I say self.getAge inside this method, let me make this bigger. Yep. So when I say self.getAge inside this method, it's actually calling for Sam. It's going to call Sam's getAge. For David, it's going to call David's getAge and all that. Okay. So I'm going to say if self.getAge dot days is greater than 10,000, then return two. Two means this employee is eligible for it. Okay, and else I'm going to say return false. Okay. Now you might have also noticed I introduced something called if else. Okay, if else is something like condition checking. So when you say if, it's going to check for that condition. If that condition is true, then I'm going to return this. Else I'm going to return false. Okay, so I'm going to say print David is eligible for greeting card. Let's see if it what it prints. Okay, so I'm going to say print Sam is Sam eligible for this. Okay, and I'm going to reduce David's age to maybe 2000. Okay, so this guy is born in January 1, 2000, and the other one, on the other guy is 1990. Okay. All right, so it says int object is not callable. It's not a function, it's just dot base. Okay, so I'm gonna run this, and it says that, okay, let me put a formatted string. Okay, and here also I'm gonna do the same thing. All right, so if I run this code now, it's going to say Sam is eligible true because Sam has been, or maybe older than 40 years or whatever. Easy. Or maybe 10,000 days. We are checking for 10,000 days. So Sam is more than 10,000 days old, so he's getting that. But David is not greater than 10,000 days, and he's not getting that, and so on. Okay. So this is the advantage of using objects, classes, so that you can group all the members together, and then you can just call that individual members using that object. Okay. All right, so that is simple class, and here is a simple method or function. And there's a one difference. If it's outside the class, it's called a function. And if it's inside the class, it's called a method. Okay, so this is called method. Or to be more precise, it's called member method. And if it's outside the class, it's called a function. Okay, the syntax is very similar, but you're going to see that self is the first parameter all the time if it's inside the class. Okay, there are other situations where self is not the first parameter, but for now we don't need to go there. Okay. But yeah, any questions so far? All right, so that is a simple class, a simple function. Now let's look at for loops. Okay, so let's say that I want to go from 1 to 20. Okay, so I can do for I in range 1 to 20 or 21 actually. Okay, I'm going to say print I. Okay, so here when I run this code, it's going to go. Yeah, it's going to print all the numbers from 1. Let me reduce this range 1 to 11. Okay, so it's going to print all the numbers from 1 to 10. So here what I did is I'm saying for I is nothing, but it's going to go for each element from 1 to 11. Okay, so remember yesterday we were saying that the end is always excluded. Yeah, the end is always excluded. The same format for this function also. The end is excluded. It's not included. Okay? So when I say 11, it's going to go from 1 to 11, but 11 is excluded. So that means it's going to go all the way from 1 to 10. Okay, and it's going to print that I. Okay, so 1 to 10, and it's going to print that. Okay, now let's say if you want to print every alternate number, you can say 2. Same syntax as slicing. Okay, so you have a start, end, and an increment. Okay, so here when I say 1 to 11, but print 2, increment is 2, it's going to go this way. Okay, it's going to say 1, 3, 5, 7, 9. Okay, and if I say 3, it's going to print 1, 4, 7, 10. Okay, so that's how it's printed. Okay, all right, so that is a simple for loop, and this is a range method. Range takes a start, takes an end, takes an increment. Okay, and increment by default is 1. So if you don't specify the increment, that's going to be by default 1. But if you don't want 1, you want something else, you can say what are the increment you want, and that's going to be applied. Okay. Now you can also do a negative increment. So you can do -1, and you can go from 11 to 1. Okay, that means it's going to go in the reverse order. Okay, 11, 10, 9, 8, 7, 2. 1 is not included because the end is excluded. Okay, so it's going to go from 2 to 11. Same as what we saw yesterday, the slicing, but here is the range method. Okay, so If you want to go from 1 to 100, loop through 1 to 100 numbers, this is a simple for loop here. Okay, so you can say 100, and that's it. Okay. If you want all the even numbers from 1 to 100, you're going to start from 2 to 100, and you're going to say 2. And that's going to print all the even numbers from 1 to 100. Okay. If you want all the odd numbers from 1 to 100, you would say start from 1 and all that, and that will print all the odd numbers. Okay. Now let's write a method called a prime number. Okay. Def is prime. So this can tell me whether a number is a prime number or not. Okay. So it takes a number called NUM. Okay. Now, what is the definition of a prime number? A prime number is not divisible by anything other than itself, other than 1 and itself. Okay. So what I want is, I want to find out if that number is divisible by anything else. Okay. So I'm going to say for I in range 2 to that number. Okay. So I'm going to loop for all the numbers starting from 2 all the way to that number, and number is excluded. Remember, number is at the end. And I'm going to say if number is divisible by I. So here, when I say modulus, that means it gives me the remainder. Okay. So here I'm saying if this number is divisible by I, that means the remainder is 0. And then I'm going to return false. False means that is not a prime number. Okay. But if I come outside of the for loop, that means I couldn't find anything. I couldn't find any number that divides that. So I'm going to return true. Okay. That means you're going to see the indentation. This return true is outside the for loop. Okay. That means we are saying if you don't find any number, then that is a prime number. Okay. So now let's test it out. Let's say is prime 5. Okay. Is 5 a prime number? Okay. Print. Let's add this formatted strings. 5 is prime. Okay. So whenever I put inside the curly parentheses, that's going to be evaluated. That means it's going to call that function. It's going to print what are the return value of that function. Okay. And let's run this, test it out. Let me comment this. Okay. And if I run this one more time, you're going to see that it says 5 is prime true. Okay. That means it tells me that 5 is a prime number. Okay. Now let's try something else. Let's try a really long number, which is 123. I don't know if 123 is a prime or not. Okay. So let's try it out. And it says 123 is prime false. Okay. It found something that divides that. Okay. Yeah, I think number 3 divides it. Okay. So let's take 107. Okay. Or simple prime number 11. 11 is a prime number. Okay. So I'm going to try 11. And it says 11 is prime true. Okay. So if I have 107, I don't think 107 is a prime number. So let's try that. Okay, 107 is prime true. Okay, so that prints the correct value. Okay. So here I have a method called is prime, and that tells me whether the given number is a prime number or not. Simple function. Okay. Now this is what a function does. These are the for loops. These are the classes and all that. Okay. Now let's look at unit testing. Okay. So let's say somebody developed these methods, which is add function, is prime method, and so on. And now your job is to test these functions. Okay. So you're supposed to test it out and tell them whether these functions are working as expected or not. Okay. Python has this module called unit test. Okay. So I can do simply import unit test. Okay. Now, okay, forget about unit test, but let's say that I can do something like this. Okay. If is prime 107 equal to true, print function is not working as expected. Oh, sorry, function is equal to false. Okay. That means I'm saying that if for some reason this function says is prime is true, 107 is false. Okay.